before the year is out, why don't we take a look back on a sci-fi film from over 20 years ago, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Cruise, Dakota Fanning, Tim Robbins, and a voiceover by Morgan Freeman, War of the Worlds. Probably one of the most famous sci-fi alien invasion stories ever told, adapted from the original story by H.G. Wells, and it's been retold many times in various forms, from Orson Welles' famous 1938 radio broadcast, the 1953 film, also called War of the Worlds, and we even had one earlier this year of the same name, starring Ice Cube, and that movie didn't receive a good response from critics and audiences. When I think of War of the Worlds, I think of the Tom Cruise edition. I remember specifically in 2005 being so blown away by this. This is the kind of film that you want to experience in a theatrical setting, or even in your own home with a surround sound system. Even now, over 20 years later, watching it the other night, I was still extremely captivated by certain moments. I can also remember how big of a controversy was surrounding Tom Cruise at the time. He had started dating Katie Holmes, and he famously jumped up and down on Oprah's couch. And there were some other things that occurred when he was on the Today Show interviewed by Matt Lauer, and let's just say people's perceptions of Tom Cruise definitely shifted after that. I mean, the whole Scientology thing, I'm not going to get into any of that. But with Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds, this isn't exactly one of his best outings. You would think as the average audience member, okay, at the very least, this is going to be an entertaining spectacle, and with Spielberg knowing how to create a sense of awe and wonder and excitement, yet also sprinkle in an element of fear as well, in that category, he manages to do all of those things. Really at the heart of this movie is this estranged family who's trying to make their way to Boston so Ray, played by Tom Cruise, can reunite his kids with his ex-wife. And along the way, as they fight their way through this alien invasion, they have to work together as a cohesive family unit. We'll talk about this as we go on. While there are certain moments that I think are really worth latching onto, there's really not as much of an emotional oomph as I would have liked to have seen from it. Does it mean it's a bad movie? No, absolutely not. Say what you want about Tom Cruise, but he manages to, in certain moments, really sell the emotional weight of being estranged from his children and not really knowing how to grapple with this idea that he never really knew about the accomplishments his daughter had, and he doesn't really know what to do with his teenage son who clearly wants nothing to do with him. It's a common thing that we see in Steven Spielberg's work, a father-son dynamic that's either really loving and close, or even distant and at sometimes hostile with each other. Case in point, Lincoln with Robert Todd and Abraham Lincoln, or Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade with Indy and his father Henry. And Spielberg has mentioned publicly that he had some similar issues with his own father as they were going through a divorce of some kind. And if you're familiar with Steven Spielberg's life story, I think this is the most explicitly clear example in this situation. Tom Cruise plays a guy named Ray Ferrier, who's a longshoreman working in Brooklyn, and he's supposed to watch his kids throughout the weekend while his ex-wife and her now husband decide to go up to Boston to visit her family. Nobody's really happy about this situation, even though Rachel is probably the most personable and willing to connect with her father, as opposed to her brother Robbie. From the moment his ex-wife Mary Ann, played by Miranda Otto, who you might recognize from Lord of the Rings, she walks right into his house and starts taking stock of everything that he has in there, yeah, it's pretty clear why those two got a divorce. But then that all changes pretty quickly when the alien invasion comes in. Through this really weird-looking storm where the wind's blowing towards the clouds, and the electrical storm that occurs, where we actually see later on, it was a front for the aliens to come down to Earth and raise their tripods out of the ground to start their invasion. Playing into the entertainment value and spectacle, from an aesthetic and technical standpoint, this movie fires on all cylinders in that category. From the lightning strikes, the tripod sounds, which still echo in my head all these years later, which in my mind gives it the impression that it's an ominous sounding foghorn. And most of the visual effects even now still hold up. The only time where I think they kind of look off is when we see the aliens walking around the basement. I mean, it's in a really darkened area in the nighttime, so I'm not really that bothered by it, but in certain shots when the lighting kind of shows on them, it's pretty noticeable. Even so, there's clearly a lot of good work that went into this. And also the biggest compliment I can give this movie is how it sells the sense of fear and dread with the alien invasion. We hear earlier on with various news reports that are going on in the background that an electrical storm causes an EMP type of effect in the areas that it hits, places like the Ukraine or other areas of Europe. Everything in the area is just basically shut off, including everybody else's cars or trucks. And then when Ray decides to go over and check where the lightning hit at least 25 to 26 times, this sequence is probably one of the best that I've ever laid eyes on. With the tripod underneath, shifting some of the intersection around, and then eventually coming out of the ground. You fuse the design of this together with John Williams' music, it shows you that these aliens do not come in peace. And it was also described by the opening narration by Morgan Freeman. And I'm not the only one to say this, but Morgan Freeman can literally read the words off of a cereal box and make it riveting, because he just has the voice. Similar to what I said earlier about Steven Spielberg, this isn't one of John Williams' best musical scores, but in this moment, which I can't play for copyright reasons, this is the one part I remember the most from the soundtrack for this one, giving off a very thrilling and ominous vibe. And even then, when you see Ray and his friends taking cover around the corner, the way the tripod just stands there observing the area, that I think is a lot more scarier than it eventually firing all the heat rays onto the crowd below. And I didn't notice this until the other night. Right before the tripod comes out of the ground, his one friend does the sign of the cross. In times like this, you could definitely use the power of prayer. Interestingly enough, that actor was this guy from Seinfeld, the street toughs as it was described by Kramer. It was frightening. You should have seen the way they talked to me. And he was also this guy in Bad Boys 2, and I believe he was in the first Bad Boys also. And real quick, his one other friend in this movie was actually in Coach Carter as this character, Mr. Cruz, playing into the fear and dread of the alien invasion once the tripod starts its attack on the crowd. Spielberg knows exactly how to place certain shots on certain people in order to exude how exactly scary this whole situation is, showing all the clothes floating around in the air and the cars being flipped over as they're being destroyed by those lasers. But don't worry, they have to throw in a cherry on top with Tom Cruise once again showing off his running moves. Like this shot in particular as he's running away and all the townhomes are being destroyed right behind him peeking around the corner watching the tripod march on, and him turning towards the direction of the camera being covered all in this soot and dirt. Just the fact that those are people's remains. Ooh, God, I literally just shook thinking about that. I gotta hand it to Tom Cruise. That 1,000-yard stare he gives off when he walks back into his house. I buy that this guy is horrified and unable to comprehend what he just saw. What do you mean, like Europe? No, Robbie, not like Europe! And there's not a whole lot of scenes like this, but when they eventually get home to his ex-wife's house in Jersey, he takes a moment to try to bond with them by showing Rachel how to do the safe space with her arms, and she tells him, no, that's not how you do it. Then he tries to make her a peanut butter sandwich only to find out that she's allergic.
Maybe a little blackjack?
I'm allergic to peanut butter.
Since when?
Birth.
Okay, that was a good one. But the funniest moment for me is right before the lightning storm happens, is when he and Rachel are sitting in their living room and he takes a bite of the sandwich and he realizes that it's hummus.
You said order.
I meant order food.
My mom and I quote that to each other sometimes since she's really into eating healthy food. And she'll offer it to me sometimes and I give her the same look that Tom Cruise gives to Dakota Fanning. Thanks, Mom. But I do really like seeing that Ray is kind of out of his element and he doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's trying the best he can with what he knows. And I have to say, Dakota Fanning in this movie is the standout for me. With this young girl who's not really sure of what's going on and someone who's definitely going to be traumatized for the rest of her life, seeing this alien invasion unfold. The first two movies I saw her in were Uptown Girls with her and Brittany Murphy, and the Cat in the Hat movie with Mike Myers. No. She was also in this movie called Man on Fire with Denzel Washington, but I didn't see that one. I remember seeing her in the trailers for this at the time thinking, that's the kid from Uptown Girls? How's she gonna do with this? And of course, in retrospect, I don't know about anybody else. She managed to win me over within seconds. And she's gone on to have a good career in the years since, even getting a nomination for a Golden Globe. Then there's Justin Chatwin as Robbie, and, well, I don't know. It's a little complicated for me when it comes to him. I think in certain moments, he's fine. Other times, he's just simply
Intolerable.
I think I understand what they were trying to go for with this young boy being estranged and resentful of his own father since his parents are now divorced. I mean, divorce, no matter how amicable it is, definitely has a negative impact on people. I've seen it with various people I've known. But throughout the movie, he doesn't call Ray Dad. He just calls him by his actual name, which understandably gets under Ray's skin. I've seen him in this one other movie called The Invisible from '07, and I thought he was perfectly fine there. But if you were to hang out in pop culture circles, he's probably most notorious for playing Goku in Dragon Ball Evolution.
I thought Justin Chatwin ruined War of the Worlds. We're gonna get back at them! We're gonna get back at them! Get back at them! Oh, jeez.
We catch up with these soldiers, look up and whoever else isn't dead, and we get back at them! We get back at them!
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. I'll never be able to unsee or unhear that. And that's another thing. He has this really weird obsession to join the military against the aliens.
Allow me.
Why?
And that's really my biggest problem with this movie, is that there's a lot of great scenes, but there's not enough downtime for us to understand the characters' mindsets and what their goals are, or what motivates them in this situation. And him eventually letting Robbie go to fight the aliens on top of this hill, I sort of understand that, okay, at some point you gotta let your kids go, but on my end it doesn't really feel like it's earned. It's almost like it just comes out of nowhere. I've heard a couple other people say this, so I'm not alone on it, but if anyone can point out a good reason for it, just let me know down below. I'll be honest though, this moment right here where Ray pleads to Robbie, for personal reasons, it does get an emotional response out of me.
I'm not letting you do this! You can hate me! You can hate me, but I love you! I'm not letting you do this! Dad!
Not to make this comparison or anything, this movie is also, I think, very similar to M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, where this family is trying to work as a cohesive unit of some kind, with this alien invasion going on in the background. I mean, I can imagine what people's preferences are depending on how you view Spielberg or Shyamalan. If I'm looking for something that's pure popcorn entertainment, I go for War of the Worlds. If I want something that's more personable and emotionally raw, I go for Signs. One big compliment I can give this movie also is seeing how humanity goes off the rails when they're thrown into this situation. Like the mob that surrounds Ray's cars are all swarming around trying to get their hands on it, and that one guy pulling the broken windshield apart with his own bare hands. That's probably the most unsettling thing I've ever laid eyes on in a movie. Until finally Ray pulls out his gun that he's been carrying on him this whole time, which I think, if I'm reading this correctly, is the catalyst for him finally showing just how much he cares for his two kids, even with the big wedge that's clear between them. Not just in that scene, but when the ferry boat takes off after the tripods start to come in. When people are confronted with their own mortality, they don't sit still.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
Bad as those things are, at least they're predictable. The normal people that scare me.
That's when you saw what people are really capable of.
I mean, didn't we see that 5 years ago with the COVID pandemic when people were hoarding packs of toilet paper? But the amount of people that get to show up in here, I always get a kick out of seeing who Spielberg manages to pull in from other areas of entertainment. Like Lisa Ann Walter, who shows up at the ferry scene. You might recognize her from The Parent Trap with Lindsay Lohan, or even Shall We Dance with J-Lo and Richard Gere. Along with the two guys I mentioned earlier who meet up with Ray before the tripod comes out. And even Tim Robbins showing up towards the third act. But the thing to note about the tripods, we don't really see the aliens that much outside of them, but it's enough to convey just how scary this whole invasion force is.
I wanted the tripods, number one, to be really scary because they're going to represent what's driving them. And so I wanted the tripods themselves, I want the audience to say, okay, it's just a machine, let's get to what's inside, let's see the aliens. I wanted the audience to actually be terrified by what these things look like from the outside.
He even goes on to say that the aliens probably came around the same proximity point as E.T. in his race, except from a much darker part of the universe, and it clearly shows. It's just the right amount of times that we show the tripods, and it never really overstays its welcome. Seeing them coming out of the water, capsizing the ferry as it pick off people from floating in the water, and when the three come out from this other side of this hilltop from far away, hearing everybody screaming, running in terror, and you can even hear Ray saying something in that moment. Just the whole spectacle and event of this whole thing and how horrifying it is when you're stuck in the middle of this situation. Whether you like this movie or not, Spielberg has a way of drawing the audience's attention in. Oh yeah, and the Amtrak that rolls through the railroad crossing while it's on fire. Watching it the other night, I thought, oh my god, I forgot all about that. I also really like how we see the events of this alien invasion from the perspective of Ray and his kids. We never really see how the rest of the world is wrestling with this. We hear whispers about it through other people talking about Europe got the worst of it. No, there wasn't really much happening over there. You can imagine that it's probably just as bad, if not worse, like it is here in the States. But it's all through the eyes of Ray as he's trying to make his way up to Boston. But then they make their way into this house where Harlan lives, played by Tim Robbins. And they find out pretty quickly, and we see right from the get-go just the crazed look in his eyes that this dude is not exactly the most stable of individuals. In fact, he's kind of unhinged and unpredictable, leading to a series of events where they're avoiding being detected by this camera that comes from the tripod, searching for any human survivors in the basement, and the aliens come down themselves to see what exactly is going on down there. Ray, Harlan, and Rachel trying to avoid that camera is very similar to the raptors in the kitchen scene in Jurassic Park, where Tim and Lex are trying to avoid being spotted by the raptors. And then we even start to see these types of vine or vegetation that's growing over the area. And we see, as they harvest blood from this one human that they're clearly terraforming the Earth, or at least trying to terraform the Earth, which sets Harlan off into a crazy spree. Ray, out of reluctance and desperation, decides to kill him. But there's one moment in here before all this happens that I absolutely adore, is when he sings Little Deuce Coupe to Rachel.
Something comes up to me, they don't even try. If I had a set of wings, man, you know she could fly.
Hate Tom Cruise all you want, but he manages, I think, to sell the emotion really hard right there. But eventually they get discovered by another camera that sneaks up on them. Rachel flees and Ray chases after her to try to figure out what's going on. And this one shot in particular, I know I'm focusing and being scatterbrained a lot when I talk about this. This one area where he looks out into the distance, I mean, it's not really a small detail, but it's pretty clear that there's a sense of fear and despair that's just settled in. Like, all hope is lost. He can't find his daughter. Everybody in the area that, as far as he knows, is dead. At least for me, I feel like, ugh. Well, now what do we do? Only then, this tripod comes out of nowhere, snatches Rachel, and then Ray manages to get its attention to get himself snatched up into this cage where they keep humans inside and pick them off randomly here and there. But thanks to Ray getting this belt of grenades from this nearby Humvee, when he gets picked up, the soldier tries to pull him out, and with this collective effort from everybody inside this cage, they pull him down, and then they see that he pulled all the pins from the grenades, finally taking down the tripod, not having to worry about their protective shields. But then they arrive in Boston and they start to realize that the vines that are growing over these areas are starting to die, and the tripods are collapsing on their own, and the one that's left is acting erratically. And we as the audience get the sense that the aliens might actually be failing at their invasion. Ray notices the birds landing on top of the tripod, telling the soldiers that their shields are down, and they fire all the javelin missiles at it, finally taking it down. These birds, as it's noted in the behind the scenes featurette, oddly ominous symbol throughout this whole thing. Right before the ferry scene happens, Rachel sees them flying towards the hilltop where the tripods come from the other side. It's almost like the birds are a big warning sign, or at least some sort of sign that something really big or bad or good is about to happen. And Ray is surprised and relieved to see that Robbie's still alive. Somehow, he miraculously lived through that explosion on the hilltop. What's the rule in cinema? If it doesn't show them dying, they're not dead. And of course, I'm not the only one to notice this, but Marianne's parents are played by the two lead actors who starred in the 1953 film War of the Worlds. Even at 15 years old, I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but I did get the impression that, are we supposed to know who those two are? I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but even if you're not familiar with the 1953 film, this movie does treat it like we're meant to know who this cameo is. And one last thing about Robbie. I know it's been already pointed out by Chris Stuckman, so this isn't new ground. As I said earlier, he just comes off as extremely intolerable in certain situations. I do get the impression that the writers, Jason Freeman and David Koepp actually, along with Steven Spielberg, never really knew what to do with him until they finally just threw their hands up and said, you know what? This isn't working. Get him out of here. As far as how the aliens are defeated, it's very similar to the criticism that people have about signs. Like, a droplet of water is the main reason as to why these aliens die when all this precipitation is lingering in the air. Okay, if you're gonna focus on that really hard, it's gonna fall apart under the slightest ounce of scrutiny. But similar to what I said about signs a few years ago, that's not the focus of the story. It's about the characters and how they're dealing with this situation. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that any alien from another planet wouldn't really be able to, more than likely, adapt to our environment, or mankind has been able to adapt to these living organisms throughout history. Besides, if it wasn't for Morgan Freeman's narration, I'd probably be a little more harsher on this ending. All in all, Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds isn't exactly a bad movie, but not a great one either. If anything, I would say it's a very effective sci-fi action thriller. While it does lack in the areas of storytelling and characterization, it makes up for it in the scope, scale, and the excitement and fear of the alien invasion, and seeing just how far humanity's willing to go. It even won 3 Academy Awards for sound mixing, sound editing, and visual effects. If anything, it does have enough of entertainment value to keep the audience engaged. That's all I have for you on War of the Worlds. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you'd like to see more from me. And as always, see you guys in the next one.